Welcome to the Guide to Wellness podcast. I'm Susannah, licensed acupuncturist. We're here to chat about health and well-being. Just a reminder, everything in this podcast is information only, not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. It's useful information to maintain a healthy life balance. Hello, and welcome to the Guide to Wellness podcast. Today, I have with me Dawn DeVos, certified integrative nutrition health coach, and we're talking gardening. Specifically, we'd like to share with you some ideas and tips on how to have fresh and delicious vegetables in your home all year long. In our clinic, we use food as medicine, so this is one thing you can do to integrate your home life and your healthy life. And also, just to be preachy for a moment, if you don't mind, in clinic, we recommend using chemicals very intentionally, knowing the cost and the benefit of these chemicals. And if you decide to use them, learn how to offset the downsides. So this goes for medications such as antibiotics, skincare products, conventional versus organic foods. And now we're bringing the conversation home to our gardens and what we put in our mouth and how we take care of our planet. So use herbicides and pesticides intentionally, if at all. Support a local nursery, buy organic seeds and fertilizers, and use your garden to nourish your family and feed the bees and all of those pollinators out there. Mm-hmm. Dawn, got anything to add there?
Yeah, I think if you have the ability to do any compost or if you're able to save any food scraps, that's always a great way to help nourish both your garden and your community. And you can find different ways to do that either through the city or with a friend who has compost or anything like that. I think it's a good way to kind of even take it a little further.
Cool. So let's jump in here, dig in, as they say. All right. So in the natural world, all plant foods start from seeds. So today, because it's springtime, we'll be discussing some basic planting and gardening tips from beginning with seeds and then all the way into harvest season in the fall, and how to preserve what you grow with just a few easy steps. It's a really fun conversation.
Yeah. So, Susannah, have you started your garden this year?
I have. I did a little inventory this morning in the backyard, and here's what I found. So the chives are probably 6 inches tall. Those are volunteers from last year. We've got the world's best organic crop going. You want to hear what it is?
Sure.
Dandelion. So, I mean, honestly, it's such a great herb. And if you know how to prepare it and it's organic, please do not pick dandelions from the lawn that's been sprayed. That is not a good idea. Yeah. But in our garden beds, we have quite a few volunteers from last year. And so we just grab them when they're tender and young. And it's such a great way to just add some greens into your diet early season and minimize your work with weeding.
Yeah, and the whole plant is edible. The flowers are edible. You can throw them in a salad.
Yep, that's very good. So dandelions, chives, there's some oregano and some thyme that's volunteering from last year. We have these beautiful they're called strawberry spinach. It's an heirloom seed in the Gallatin Valley that I planted literally about 10 years ago. And I just make sure that some of those flowers go to seed every fall. And then we've got these beautiful little greens coming in the spring. And I don't do anything. I just go out there and pick them. And then they turn into these fun little wild strawberries come summer.
Awesome.
So we got those. And then a few weeks ago, we planted some snap peas. And we also have spinach that is spinach, lettuce, and tatsoi. It's a little mini baby bok choy that's just all volunteering. And some random volunteer that I can't identify yet, but I'm sure it'll be tasty. So that's a huge way to get a head start on the garden, is to just make sure that the season before, even if you're doing containers, that you have some plants that you allow to go to seed and then just sprinkle the seeds in the dirt and then just do nothing all winter. So anyway, we've got a bunch of seeds in the ground: kale, spinach, no beets yet. We'll get to those. Once the growing season gets rolling a little bit more, we'll be doing more greens, lots of beets. Got to have some basil and some other herbs in there, and carrots are so yummy. And cherry tomatoes are easy to grow here. And I love lemon cucumbers, so I'll always grow those.
Right on.
Yeah,
Wonderful. Yeah.
So Yeah, you want to keep going?
Yeah, sure. Well, I know I've started a few things. I haven't gotten quite as extensive a garden this year, but I am in an apartment, so I'm taking advantage of container gardening. Right now, I've got some chamomile. I've got Jack, our fellow acupuncturist, and my beloved fiance is a big fan of dill, and so we grow that every year,
Nice.
like no matter where we are.
Cool.
And we've got I've started some Swiss chard and some skullcap, I did pick up 2 little tomato plants, and that's about it for me right now.
Are your tomatoes outside yet?
They are.
Ooh, living boldly.
I know. It's just been so lovely.
Yeah.
So,
and you can bring them in since they're in containers. You can just pop them inside. And
yep,
that's
and
a
they're
great
small
way.
still.
Yeah,
So
perfect. Okay,
Yeah.
good. All right.
Yeah. Let's see.
So we want to chat about how to get greens and vegetables into your freezer come winter when you don't have a big yard, right? Isn't that really what we're trying to do here? And we're trying to encourage people to grow more of their own food, keep it local. That doesn't mean you never buy foods from another part of the world, but to just have something in your backyard. It makes it fun, connects you into nature, and it's a great way to stay healthy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, container gardening is
Yeah.
super important. So,
Yeah, so I've gardened in the ground. I've gardened in boxes. I've gardened in laundry baskets. Living in kind of an urban environment, you kind of make do with what you can. And container gardening is a fantastic way to make growing some of those greens and those smaller plants that are really great for you accessible in a small environment.
Nice.
So one of the things that I really like to do is, and I've gotten better about this throughout the years, is to start some seeds inside. Being living in an apartment, I'm not a farmer, so I'm not looking for a lot of growing space. I'm not looking for like surplus crops, but I am looking to do what I can to support my nutrition and help supplement my kitchen a little bit. And so when we're thinking about gardening, especially in Bozeman, we're in plant hardiness zone 4B. So that's a colder temperature, shorter growing season. We also live at high elevation and in a dry climate. And those are all factors you kind of have to think about when you're choosing what seeds you might want to be planting.
Yes.
So we do have a wonderful article from Cashman's Nursery in the show notes to learn more about plant hardiness zoning and what is kind of left out of the equation, particularly that like elevation, dry climate. Feel free to check that out to learn a little bit more.
Can I jump in for a second?
Absolutely.
So if you are listening to this and you're not in the Gallatin Valley, then what you need to do is jump on good old Dr. Google and definitely call a local nursery and find out what they're recommending by month to plant.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of local nurseries will have some education there. Like they'll put on some events where you can go for free and learn about some of the varieties that might grow well and how to take care of them. So one of my favorite ways to get going on plants is starting seeds indoors. And a lot of people start them very early, but I usually start about 4 to 6 weeks before the last frost. Part of that is that I'm not quite on top of my planning, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to do that really well. But I like to do this with leftover clamshell containers or little yogurt containers.
Cool.
And that way I get this thing in my kitchen that I get to reuse rather than throw away or recycle.
Nice.
And where we are, we have some limited recycling. So it's great to have a way to use those and give them a little bit of a second life.
Cool.
And to do those with a clamshell container, they're going to have a little lid that is on a hinge. And you'll get them from restaurants, leftover food. A lot of times cat grass or like catnip and wheatgrass are grown in those. You can buy them at a grocery store sometimes.
But also the greens you buy, the organic greens from winter, right?
Yeah. Yep. And sprouts are often put into those clamshell containers. So you can
Right.
save all of those And you'll just fill them with a little bit of soil and put your seeds in the soil as according to their planting recommendations.
And you want potting soil, not garden soil, correct?
Correct.
Good.
Yes.
Okay.
And sometimes you can even get like specifically seed starting soil.
Yeah.
And that's a great way to start it. It helps with moisture control and just giving those seeds good fluffy environment to start out in. And one of the things that you can pay attention to is moisture. So if you close the lid of these clamshells, it acts like a little greenhouse. So it really holds in moisture. And then you have to be really careful about not overwatering. Essentially, you just want to water until the soil is pretty saturated, but not pooling in the bottom. And most of these containers are clear, so you can almost see that if you just lift up and look from underneath.
Could you use a spray bottle with water?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
I think just making sure that you're getting the seeds. We live in such a dry climate that water evaporation does happen even with a closed lid. So making sure that those have enough water and then maintaining them with a spray bottle would be the way to do it.
Cool.
And I like to water the soil before I put my seeds in.
Awesome. I was just going to say that.
Yeah, it helps keep those seeds in place, and then you can maintain it with a spray bottle. That's a great suggestion. I'm glad you brought that up. So drainage, like I said, only really an issue if you overwater the soil. But with these plants, if you don't plant them, the sprouts can get long and leggy. So you want to be on top of getting them in the dirt. And when they're long and leggy and they're thin and spindly, they're not going to be able to support their own weight. So it's really important to expose them to some airflow if you're keeping them inside for a longer period of time, or just getting them outside as soon as they're ready. And a lot of large-scale growers will start really early in the year, but for us, we're just looking to grow maybe some greens. Tomatoes are a little bit on that longer side, but greens are going to be really easy. A lot of herbs. I love to grow herbs, both for culinary use and to make teas with.
Nice.
So those are some of my favorite things to grow. And for information on which seeds to plant when, and this is such an extensive topic, so we've linked an article in the show notes to the Farmer's Almanac for Bozeman, Montana. So feel free to go on, check that out, and you can look at specific plants that you might be looking to grow this year.
And June 3rd is the day, right?
June 3rd is last frost, so let's be ready for it. All right, so the last thing for these started plants is when you're moving them outside, be really gentle. You don't want to disrupt those new and delicate root systems. So if your budget allows, you can always start your seeds in a small compostable container that you can get at garden stores. I also really like the peat pellet starter varieties that you can do in a tray. They're really easy to pick up and move.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
So that gets us through the spring and into our growing season. You caught that. June 3rd is the predicted last frost date. All of you listening from elsewhere are going to be laughing at us.
Yeah.
I got to say, my mom was an avid gardener, and she lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, and she and I every year would have a tomato race. And sometimes my tomatoes would get beat back by hail and snow, but just as many years, her tomatoes would get beat back by slugs. So there. So we actually, it was kind of an even match, believe it or not.
Yeah.
So you just got to know where you are and what works best in your garden. So, yeah. So we're into spring, now we're into growing season. So I'm going to really take a step back here and look at the whole year, because the goal here is that we have organic, lovely, delicious, almost free, not entirely, sweat equity vegetables in our home, ready to go, no matter what season and what month of the year. So that sounds like 12 months. And I want to talk about a 5-season calendar for how to have veggies all year long.
So you say 5 seasons. Usually we think about there being 4. Where are you getting the 5th season here?
I set you up for that, didn't I?
Yes.
All right, a little Chinese medicine lesson here. So in Chinese medicine, they talk about 5 seasons, and here's why. So I'm just going to go through them in order, starting with the winter. That's the time of water. So there's 5 elements and 5 seasons. Winter is, and so I'll go through them: winter, spring, summer, late summer, and fall. So late summer is the one that we're adding here. And in the world of gardening, it's actually super important. And in medicine, it's super important. So winter is the water element. The foods that we're thinking about here are the roots and the dark-colored foods. And this is when I like to plan for the gardening season, when you're deep in winter and you're wishing it's spring and it's just not yet. Now, in the Gallatin Valley, that whole planning notion is going to extend well into when it's spring for everybody else. So that's how I kind of get my gardening restlessness out of the way. That's when I plan my garden. And you look at seed catalogs and you can plan out where do you want your flowers and where do you want your herbs, and you can just kind of plan it all out and start buying your supplies or saving your clamshells or whatever you need to do, so you can sort of gather your tools. Come spring, that's the wood element, and this is when we're talking about sprouts and leafy greens and things that point upwards. It's the action time. It's for planting. And this is the time of the liver and the gallbladder. And in clinic right now, we're talking a lot about liver and gallbladder and health in those systems so that we can be super healthy and vital as we move into summer. Summer is the fire element and the fire season. This is when things are at full maturity. So spring is when they're growing like bamboo and grass and just growing like mad. Summer is when they mature. And they're in full growth. Maybe they're not matured yet. So fruits and juicy things and tomatoes and red foods, harvesting and maintaining and forward planning into winter is what we do in the summer. So you still want to be thinking about winter in the summertime. That's when you harvest all these greens and get them ready for your January soups and stews. Late summer, so summer is the fire element and it's the heart organ system. Late summer is earth, and that's about digestion, and this is as things are maturing. So all of the plants are now maturing, but we're not yet quite ready to harvest them. So this is the maturation, the digestion, the absorption time of year in Chinese medicine. So we think about grains and rice and corn and the yellow foods. So that's the addition to the 5 seasons of that late summer. Fall is the time of metal, and this is lung and large intestine. So this is the harvest time. So late summer and fall do sort of swing together a little bit and overlap. This is when we talk about squash and roots and white foods. And these white foods, meaning downward pointing white roots like parsnips and turnips and things like that, are super important in the fall. So you're wrapping up, you're doing your final harvesting, you're laying your garden to rest, and you're beginning to enjoy the produce from earlier in the year that's been preserved.
Wonderful. You bring up late summer, and that actually reminds me of a cookbook that I had that called that kind of 5 season. They actually extended it even into 6. You got this, they called late summer the scorch. So you had summer, and then you had scorch. And then I think there was like thaw, and then there was spring. So you get this intermediate zone between these areas where things are growing or things are starting to come out, and we can begin to use them. So
that's a sort of a big picture, and we'll be talking about this in a few minutes, but just we want to just give you a big picture about the growing season, and then we want to dive back into spring. So remember that this is the time of year when you absolutely can be getting out there and getting stuff in the garden, planning out your garden space, your budget, and your time. Make it simple. Really, really, really. Like one of the things that stresses me out is when I overplant my garden, and then come July, I want to be out playing and on the river and hiking and running, and I'm like, oh, I have to weed the garden. So please do think ahead. It's super, super important. Because this is supposed to be fun, and it's supposed to be nourishing and nurturing, not another chore. There will be days that are chores, but hopefully not many. So you're going to plan ahead. And remember, we're talking here about small spaces and containers. There's lots of conversation about small farming and larger gardens that we're not discussing today. So if you're buying seeds, make sure you're buying them early. They sell out, believe it or not. So So just be aware of that. It's another good reason to get on it now, and also just save them from last year. You don't. You can just dry some of your own seeds and save them in little paper envelopes. You can trade them with your friends and neighbors, and just like I said earlier, just taking the mature seeds from last fall, shaking them over the beds, and just letting them sit there through the winter, and then they're going to do their own thing and replant. And I'll often just put an inch or so of compost on top, and the little seeds will just kind of push their way through. So reseeding works really well. And we'll do another podcast on this topic in harvest season, so stay tuned for that, okay? Make sure you're finding the right spot in your home for those indoor seeds. You talked about this some already. And check if you are buying seeds on the little seed packet. It's going to tell you how to plant them, like what seed spacing and how deep in the soil. So all the little seed packets are going to give you specific instructions. So right now, just to reiterate, what we're doing in the Gallatin Valley is spinach, dark green leafy vegetables, peas, both snap peas and sweet peas. Remember, the Gallatin Valley is the sweet pea, maybe even like capital of the world. We have a sweet pea festival, so we're supposed to actually even plant sweet peas on Good Friday, which is kind of crazy. This year would not have worked. But sweet peas are so fun to just stick anywhere in your garden, and they'll just climb up and be beautiful come July and August.
They're so beautiful.
So kale, not everybody loves kale, but if you make it small, collect it and harvest it when it's small leaves, it's a fabulous, fabulous starter plant to grow in the garden. Tatsoi is this Oriental green. It's super yummy and easy to grow along with baby bok choy. Collard greens are super nutritious. Check out our social media social media post on that a couple weeks ago. Kohlrabi, I love. We put the kohlrabi on the grill, and you can roast all these greens. They're really, really yummy. Whatever green you like is what you should plant.
Mm-hmm.
In late May, go ahead and plant another round of those greens and peas every couple of weeks. Just get a couple more in, and this is going to allow for harvesting throughout the summer because some plants are going to mature, and then you have some new ones coming in behind. So keep in mind lettuce. Save a shady spot in your yard somewhere, or a container you can put in the soil, because lettuce does not germinate well when it's really hot in July.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as it's in the shade, you should be able to do a second crop of lettuce. So lettuce, beets. Beets, we really are going to talk a lot about beets and beet greens. So you're going to hear a lot about that. Get those in the ground now, and you'll hear about it more later, but they're yummy, they're easy, and they freeze really well. And the beets you can do all kinds of things with come October. Flowers, of course. Think about bee and pollinator-friendly mixes, and also companion plants that flower and keep the pests off your tomatoes and your cucumbers and stuff like that. Come June, the obligatory basil and tomatoes can go in if you have space for it, and more beets. Did you hear that? Okay.
They really are fantastic. Like, there's a reason we push the beets.
We'll talk more about that. They're good for thinning the bile and good for fat digestion. They're good for cardiovascular health, and they're good for the liver. And they grow really well here, and they're yummy.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go.
Yeah, lovely. Well, there is plenty to do throughout the summer. And as your plants come into their fullness, you get to experience this beautiful relationship to a garden. It's so much more than just the nutrition for your body that you're doing, but you're helping. You're, like Susannah was talking about, you're helping with the environment. You're also getting yourself out there, and that's great for your mental state. So for many greens, especially the darker and leafy greens that are so full of nutrition, the best time to eat those is when they're young. So for example, borage, a little bit of a different green. Not everybody's going to grow them. But if you grow borage, it's a great companion plant for tomato. Has these beautiful purple flowers when it is in full bloom. But it has what are called trichomes, which are these stinging hairs like you would see on nettle when it's fully grown. Right. But when it's young and these plants and these leaves are really tender and soft, those trichomes haven't fully developed yet. So you can actually pick them and eat them. They make for a delicious, very mineral-rich salad additive. So let's see. We love the purple flowers because the pollinators, if you plant borage and it goes to flower, it is covered in bees. It's amazing to just sit out and watch. And of course, all of the rest of your garden is like so stoked about it. So when you are thinking about these greens, you can think about the borage. You can think about dandelion, like we had talked about. Mm-hmm. That's a great one. But any dark leafy green, and kale is one of those as well. Pick it tender, young, and it's going to be a lot more enjoyable to eat. Mm. And the reason that you do that is because the leaves in these dark leafy greens can grow bitter as they get older and more mature. Mm.
Cool.
So these spring shoots and leaves are full of like sweet, nourishing vitamins, minerals, as well as this lovely rising energy of spring. And if you're not using herbicides, eat your dandelions from your yard. Though if you're not in charge of yard care, then check with your lawn care service about what their standard operating procedure is. And remember that it can take years to reduce the environmental toxins in your soil. So consume with caution if your yard has not been maintained organically for a number of years. Otherwise, just be really if you're going to eat and you know that it hasn't been sprayed, wash them really well, and just be selective about what you're putting in your mouth.
You can come to my yard.
Yeah, honestly, like you might have a friend or somebody who has a yard that they're like, well, I know we don't spray because we've lived here for 5 years or whatever, and they're going to be covered in dandelions. Right. I'm like, please take them away.
Yeah. I don't spray because I have a dog.
Mm-hmm. And, that's really important.
And she loves the backyard. And also, I really enjoy watching all of the bees, all the honeybees coming through, and the little rabbits, and all the birds and the baby birds. And like, there's so much wildlife in my yard because we've been planting shrubs and trees and flowers for the wildlife for as long as we've lived there for nearly 20 years. So we've got kind of a little zoo going on, and it's kind of fun.
Well, you had mentioned at the very beginning, there's a time and a place for these chemicals, but on your food is generally not one of them.
So anyway, time and a place for everything. So let's really talk about, how do you do this? So we talked about planting, but how do you get them into your kitchen year round? I like to freeze them. That's what I do. So we have a chest freezer where we put our elk meat and we put our berries and we put our greens in there. But you can do this with a conventional freezer as well. You just have to think a little bit smaller. So here is what I suggest. And when my kids were little, this was like a multiple day of the summer season. We would get out there in the backyard, and it would take a couple hours because we had a pretty big garden. And we would be so green by the end of this. It was crazy how messy and green we would get. It was super fun. So what you do is, whether you're doing this in a container in a small scale or a raised bed that has, maybe our raised beds are 4 by 8 feet, and we've got about 4 of them. So you water the garden bed or the container the night before or early in the morning, and you choose a sunny day. This is really important. So you let the sun dry the leaves all the way, all right? So the leaves are going to be clean and dry, and that way when you freeze them, they're not going to clot together and be a big old ice cube, right? They're going to be pretty. You can just easily break them apart and just choose how much you want for any one particular soup or stew or omelet or whatever it is. So what we do is we take scissors or a little pruning shears and just pull the number of leaves that you want to harvest that day, and still make sure that the plant has something that it can continue to grow with, unless you're at the end of the season and you're like, okay, we're done, and you'll know. So leave a couple of leaves and a little bit of the stem, so the plant can continue to grow, and then harvest the rest. So keep in mind the stems are really where all those minerals are really packed in. So I want you to eat and harvest the stems. And when you're cooking them, you just cook them for a little bit longer. So you bring all these in, just get some bunch of big soup pots and paper bags, and just harvest them all. Bring them into the kitchen, and you'll need a food processor for this. And you need a bunch of wax paper bags. This is how I do it. And then you need a handful of gallon-sized Ziplocs. So you set up the kitchen with a food processor, and the whole thing, the stem and the leaves, go into the shredding setting, right, on the food processor, and you're just going to have these shredded leaves, and then you're just going to take handfuls of them and put them into a wax paper bag. So I'm not sure, but I think that this is a way that you can keep the plastic chemicals off your greens as you freeze them. That's my theory. I may be wrong. So this is literally just a handmade little tradition that I started. So you jump in and tell me if you think you have a better way. So you fill up these wax paper sandwich bags with the serving size that you want for any particular pot of soup or stew, or maybe smaller for omelets or just cooking some meat and greens in the mornings come winter. So just a few handfuls, and then you wad that up and then just put a whole bunch of those into a big old gallon-sized Ziploc and then label it like beet greens or kale or spinach. And oftentimes I'll throw in the parsley and the oregano and some of the other herbs that we also have maturing. I will actually put those in as well, and that way you just kind of mix them all together. It's pretty yummy. Yeah. So this is how we do it, and I still have some beet greens in the freezer that I've been savoring, and so I'm still working on last summer. It's pretty nice.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Wow. And it sounds like it's a really affordable and easy way to go about getting these foods into your freezer.
Yes.
It doesn't seem like, if you have this set up, it doesn't seem like it's going to take much time at all.
No, it doesn't. It really doesn't. Maybe an hour for like all my beds. It doesn't take a long time, and it's fun. Super fun. Yeah.
For sure. I think about the stems as well, thinking about the chard as well.
Oh, yeah, chard. I didn't mention that. Definitely. Get that Swiss chard in there.
Not only are the stems going to be wonderful, but they're also just beautifully colored.
Yes.
And when you have these beautiful colors, you get a lot of really great nutrients.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you usually like to eat and cook these greens once you're into the colder months?
Oh, like I said, make it easy. Right? It's not hard. You just pull the little wax paper bag out and you just say, all right, I'm making some pasta tonight. Or if you're doing a smoothie and it's the dark green leafy vegetables, please scald them, like throw some boiling water over them first. So you do need to pre-cook just a little bit any of these dark green leafy vegetables. You don't want to eat them raw. They're not as digestible. So you do want to think about that. But if you're throwing them into a soup or a stew or a pasta dish, just toss them on in there. Super easy.
Right on. That's a great tip. Well, I haven't done much in the way of freezing fresh produce. I've certainly cooked with plenty of frozen spinach or frozen artichoke, things like that. But I'm really accustomed to preparing what I grow fresh. So it's great to learn some really easy tactics. I'll also make like soups or sauces. So I'll think about, if I'm getting that fresh produce, I'll just make it into a soup and make a big batch of it and then freeze a good chunk of that.
Awesome. Yeah,
but
we do that too. Yeah.
That does take up a lot of space. So having the option to just do the greens is a good way to do that.
Well, and also, who wants to make a big pot of soup in July when it's 100 degrees out? Right?
Yeah.
Well, maybe you do.
Well, I like making like pasta sauces and things like that.
Because
you can put, or pizza sauce. Yeah, with the oregano.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that I'm really a little more familiar with is drying. Since I primarily grow herbs and, or at least in the containers, I'll primarily grow herbs and kind of smaller, lighter weight plants. I will dry them, and it's a fairly easy method, and I think it's particularly good for herbs. There's a reason you have dried herbs in your kitchen all year round, right? So I don't have a dehydrator, and I have tried putting plants in the oven, but my personal favorite is kind of this janky DIY setup.
Say more.
And, well, it is based on a solar dryer design that is used in like underdeveloped areas of the world where they need these things to like dry produce and preserve them if they're in a really challenging climate to keep your food fresh. So basically what that ends up looking like is a window with a screen underneath that sits kind of at an angle propped on some legs on the back half of it. And it allows really good airflow and it allows heat to escape. But since the sun can kind of bleach and cook those plants, I like to do it in the shade. And what I do is I just take 2 old window screens, and they're in a frame, so there's a little bit of a gap, but it's a small gap, so you can't do huge plants. You're doing small leaves and flowers, things like that. And then you'll lay your herbs out, like harvesting them in the same way that you talked about with your greens, that watering them really early or the night before so that they're nice and dry and clean. And laying them out in a single layer, putting that second screen on top, and just leaving them to dry. Outside in the shade on a flat surface is usually what I'll do. Like I used to do it on my porch back in Minnesota. Of course, it was very humid there. It's a totally different climate, so it would take up to 3 days to dry something. Whereas here, I bet it'd dry out fairly quickly, like maybe even within a day, depending on the type of plant. But the bigger the plant, the more water content, the longer it's going to take to dry. Yep. So some of my favorite things to grow and dry, like I said, are the herbs for teas, and I have chamomile in the garden right now, and I love growing chamomile. Aww. And the more you develop it, and it does reseed wonderfully because it's all those little tiny seeds that's
ground
just
cover.
Like, yeah, absolutely. And then you get this beautiful flower as well as this wonderful, like, soothing tea. It's fantastic. So, Susannah,
I want to add something in there about drying.
Okay.
You're reminding me that one thing that I didn't talk about, I have a super DIY drying technique, which is when I'm harvesting the sage and the thyme and the, not so much the basil, but all these other herbs that we grow, I'll just put it, I take the whole stalk and I put it upside down in a grocery bag, and I just fold the lid over and I leave it alone for 1 to 2 weeks, and I check back every now and then to make sure, like you said, that it's dry, but it's not too dry,
right?
And that it still smells strong.
Yes.
And then I I put a glove on, and I just like, I don't know, what do you say? You just like strip the leaves off the stems, and then I either just crush them with my hands or I put it back in the food processor. Or this is when I'll use actually like a high-powered blender, and I just shred them into a powder, and then I give them away for Christmas gifts, and I keep a whole bunch in my. So it's actually super. It works really well, and
Is
I like
it a paper bag that you're doing?
Yes,
that
I
in?
use a paper bag. Yep,
Right
it's
on.
about as easy as it gets. So if you don't have any old screens, try that. But I love that we are. Again, we're growing our food and we're sharing it around and using it for our medicine. So, and it really should be something that just makes us happy.
Absolutely.
So, I hope with that in mind, you've been inspired by today's conversation and want to get out there and just grow what you want to eat. And then we have a little challenge for you. We want you to grow something that you know is good for you and grows in your part of the world, but that you haven't really developed a relationship with. We want you to grow it, start to finish, and eat it, and develop a relationship with a new food. So obviously, our bias is going to be the dark green leafy vegetables and the beets and the beet greens, not just the beets, because the greens can nourish you throughout the summer, and then the roots and the greens make for a great winter storage item that supports you all winter long. The reason why we like these greens and the beet greens is just because they're so easy, and the tender young leaves are delicious roasted and sautéed in soups. They're just so versatile. So hopefully our gardening DIY tips have been good for you, and feel free to let us know when you see us next what's working for you and
what you have in your garden.
What do you have in your garden? And stay tuned for more podcasts as we go through the growing season. We're going to help keep you eating well all winter long. I want you to check out our Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube channels as we go through this season, because we'll be posting small little video clips and tips on, okay, it's mid-July, what do you do now? And it's late August, what do you do now? Okay, so last thing I want to really leave you with is gardening should be fun. It should be a joy. All right, so go at it and go have some fun.